All right, let's discuss large group portraits. So I think the first thing we should define is what is a large group? Well, when I'm working, I usually think like a family group or extended family. So something like 8, 10, 12, 16 people. That's a pretty large group. But you may need to photograph like a whole school or something. So let's discuss the best focal lengths for large groups. By the way, these are just things that I do. Take what you can from this video and apply it to your own style, your own groups, your own philosophy. But these things work for me. So let's start with the first one. The first one is anytime I have a group, I try to avoid wide lenses. And the reason is wide lenses distort things. So if you have a group that starts to get together for like a candid shot, the poor people on the ends are going to look wide, overweight, huge, stretched out, weird heads. And then the people in the center are going to be really, really tiny. So the only time I use a wide lens for a group shot, if it's more of a fun group, like, it's during the reception or the party where people are dancing, for me, a wide lens works for a group there. Now, by the way, sometimes it's completely unavoidable because you only have so much area. So sometimes you have to use a wider lens because you can't move any further back. A lot of times this will happen at a party where I have a certain number of people that are lined up. I will have my shot maybe at a certain focal length, and then more and more people start to like add on to the large and larger group. And sometimes you can't move further back, but all those people now are in front of your camera. And so you have no choice but to go to 17 millimeters, which sometimes is unavoidable. So what I would recommend there is if you have to shoot a group at 16 millimeters and 17 millimeters, is definitely leave a lot of room on the ends of the photograph. One reason to do this is because there's less distortion in the center of your lens, okay? Anytime anyone's on the perimeter, they're gonna be completely messed up. So if you have to shoot with a 17, try as best as you can to get people in the center so you can crop later. And also in post, you can completely change the lens distortion, and the little person in the center, the person who's furthest away in this group, you can actually bring them forward and save that photograph. So the biggest advice to take from this video is anytime you have a group, your rule should be how far can I get back? Okay. And so it completely depends on your room, your space. Are you outdoors? So the further back you can get, the better you are. Okay. So let's start with you can't get back too far. So that brings us to the 35 to 50 millimeter range for a group shot. 10 people, 12 people. This is a normal focal length. That means everyone will look pretty good and you will be a certain distance away from them that makes sense to take a photograph. You're not going to be in Carajo land 2 blocks away, and you're not going to be up in their face. So 35 to 50 millimeter gives you a very normal looking photograph. This is kind of a safe group shot. And sometimes it could be a little boring. So what's more interesting is the people's outfits or their pose. So 35 is good. 50 is even better. 50 is like one of my go-tos. So this is a totally safe choice and you can fit everyone into the photograph. Now, sometimes you can get away with shooting wide open with a 50 millimeter, 1.4. You can get a group shot. You just have to be able to understand how much depth of field there is, with that group. So if you have one row of people, sometimes you have about 2 feet of depth, and that's safe enough to get everyone in focus. But you have to be careful. You have to make sure that everyone's toes are totally in line if you want to shoot wide open. You have to be careful. Now for me, the sweet spot for taking a group shot is 75 millimeters, 85 millimeters, 100 millimeters, okay? Now, this means you have to move really far back if the group is large. So what you want to do is also match your knowledge of this focal length that you like, 100, with the knowledge of posing a big group. And I think the best way to pose a big group is to actually stack people. If what happens with a long lens, like 100, 150 millimeters, if you put a bunch of people next to each other, they start to look awesome, but they are only a small strip on the frame, okay? They're you're so far back that they're only a tiny little strip. So what ends up happening is you have to crop that photo into a super wide, And that's kind of really hard for people to print. So if you start to get a group that's really wide, what you want to do is sort of stack them. You want to cut that group in half and sort of sit some people in front, have some people standing in the back, and then shoot at 100, 150 millimeters and so on. Now what's great about 100, 150, 200 is that the background actually becomes part of the photograph. It sort of comes towards the person. So for example, if you're shooting with a city in a background, if you use 35 millimeters, the city will be really small. But if you use 100 millimeters, it brings that city very close right behind them. So you can actually make your own backgrounds. Now, a couple of disadvantages. If there's small kids in the group, well, a lot of times as a photographer, you're supposed to keep them engaged. This is a little bit of a bonus tip, but if you have a very small child in the group that you have to get for the photo, you have to let the rest of the group know that you're going to be kind of working. You're going to be a little bit of a ham, a little bit of a clown, for them to ignore the kid and for you to get the shot. But one disadvantage with a long lens is you're too far away to engage with smaller children. So you have to sometimes you have to throw the long lens away and just use the 50 millimeters so you're closer to interacting with the smaller kids and even older kids and adults. You might find it's better for your style to stay close and keep them all pumped up, as opposed to having a 200 millimeter and being like, okay, now look at me, that kind of thing. All right, what about the biggest groups? Sports teams, schools, when you have 50 or more people, where your best bet is to make sure that people are stacked. So again, you can have rows, you can have bleachers, but if you want to shoot a big group, it's good to be higher than them sometimes. And it's also good to still use that longer lens, because instead of using a wide lens, if you do use a wide lens, the people in the front row will be very large and the people in the back row will be way too small. Their heads will be tiny. So you don't want to do that. What you want to do is, again, go to the football field, put people on a bleacher and back up as far as you can. Zoom to 100, 200, and the whole bleacher section, it'll flatten out. My phone is ringing. So before you take that shot, check how much space you have to go back and then zoom as much as you can, 70, 85, 100, and your group shots will look a little nicer. All right, I'll see you guys next time.